Welcome back to the show, my friends. I am your host, Eric Szilagyi. If you've had an uncomfortable experience and you'd like to have it shared here on the show, please get a hold of me at contact.uncomfortable@gmail.com. The world wants to hear your story. It wants to hear your experiences. So, reach out to me, and let's get yours on the next episode of Uncomfortable. If you haven't yet, make sure to like us on Facebook and Instagram, both at Uncomfortable Podcast 65. And once you get a chance to listen to a couple episodes or view a couple of the episodes, please make sure to leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you can. That alone is the one most important thing that you, the listener, can do to help get this show out in front of other people. And with other people listening, that means more great stories coming to you. If video is more your thing, then make sure you subscribe to Uncomfortable Podcast on YouTube, where you can get the video version of most shows, not tonight's show, but most shows. If that's where you want to listen to us, please make sure to click like and subscribe so you're notified with every release. Take a minute and check out the Uncomfortable link tree. It's the single best place that you can find anything and everything uncomfortable all in one spot. The link for that is in the description below in the show notes. I've got a great show for you tonight. It's a little bit different than normal, but I'm excited about it. I've done a couple of these in the past. It's been a while. I truly enjoy them. And if you're ready, let's get into it. All right. I've decided to cover a story, an event, that has long been revered in the annals of Bigfoot legend and lore. A tale that combines historical accounts and possible folklore. What I've tried to do here tonight is to create for you an accurate overview of the Ape Canyon event from 1924. A story that has remained a part of this cultural phenomenon for just over 100 years. Now, I'm sure that most of you have heard of this event. Hopefully, I can cover this in a way that will, if nothing else, give you a little bit more to think about the next time you hear it mentioned. Let me set the stage. The year is 1924, near the southeast shoulder of Mount St. Helens in the beautiful state of Washington. 5 men staked a claim where they intended to prospect for gold. Those men were Fred Beck, Marion Smith, his son Roy, Gabe Lefevre, and John Peterson. The Ape Canyon incident took place July 10th, 1924. It allegedly involved a confrontation between the 5 miners and what they described as aggressive ape-like creatures. Now, throughout that day, Beck and his companions reportedly had seen the creatures in the distance. They came across the animals while in the wilderness. They recognized that they were significantly larger than a typical human, standing 7 feet tall by their estimation. Fred recalled seeing one creature near the edge of the canyon. The waters are muddy on just who was with Fred at the time, but his companion raised his rifle and fired, which intensified that night's chaos. This is the act that ultimately escalated the situation and set off a series of retaliatory attacks that culminated in the siege of their cabin that night. That night, the men barricaded themselves inside the newly built cabin. Fred described how the once peaceful night transformed as the creatures began throwing rocks at their shelter. Their simple cabin, made of wood beams and tin roofing, shook with each blow, and the miners quickly found themselves fighting for their lives. That night, Beck recounted several other creatures seemingly retaliated by throwing large rocks at the cabin. The miners felt that they were being besieged by a group of these creatures, which they later referred to as mountain devils. The constant barrage of rocks indicated to the miners that they were not simply dealing with a curious animal, but rather a group exhibiting defensive aggression towards perhaps their territory. In the panic, Beck and his group armed themselves, firing shots blindly into the dark. After a night of repeated and escalating attacks, the men cautiously emerged from the cabin at first daylight. In the distance, the men saw one of the creatures. Beck claims to have raised his rifle and hit one of the creatures multiple times. He insists that he watched as the wounded beast toppled off a cliff into a seemingly inaccessible canyon. Now I'm going to read to you an excerpt from a book considered to be one of the Bigfoot classics. The name of the book, I Fought the Ape Men of Mount St. Helens, Washington. Told by Fred Beck of Kelso, Washington, written September 27, 1967 by his son, Ronald A. Beck. Ronald starts the book off with, "What are abominable snowmen?" Fred Beck is qualified to tell you what they are. He was one of a party of 5 miners attacked by them in 1924, the most famous of such incidents in North America. The incident has become legend in the Northwest. He tells the real facts after 43 years of silence. Introduction. It is my intention in this book to not only tell you about the historic encounter I had with these mysterious creatures, but also to reveal to the public what I believe they are. Truth often is stranger than fiction, but the strangeness comes from the clouds surrounding our minds, not the mystery itself. This is not a large book, but may the largeness be conveyed by the picture I hope to paint of the truth. Much has been written about this day in 1924, and I feel it right that I express my view at last. To avoid embarrassment to the relatives of the other 4 men involved in the 1924 incident, I have not directly mentioned their names. The name Hank is a pseudonym for one of the main characters in the incident. Chapter 1. The Attack. First of all, I wish to give an account of the attack and tell of the famous incident of July 1924, when the hairy apes attacked our cabin. We had been prospecting for 6 years in the Mount St. Helens Lewis River area in southwest Washington. We had, from time to time, come across large tracks by creek beds and springs. In 1924, I and 4 other miners were working our gold claim, the Vanderwhite. It was 2 miles east of Mount St. Helens near a deep canyon now named Ape Canyon, which was so named after an account of the incident reached the newspapers. Hank, a great hunter, a good woodsman, was always a little apprehensive after seeing the tracks. The tracks were large, and we knew that no known animal could have made them, the largest measuring 19 inches long. It was in the middle of July, and we had received a good essay on our claim, and everyone was excited. I remember I had a tooth that was aching, and I suggested to Hank that he should take me to town to see a dentist. But he was so enthused by the prospects of the gold mine, he barely took time to answer me. He replied that God or the devil could not get him away from there. We had all come up in his Ford, and I had no way to get to town unless he took me. So when we went back to our cabin on the north side of the canyon, I had a nagging toothache and little appetite for our evening meal of beans and hotcakes. Hank, though apprehensive, was still determined. We had been hearing noises in the evening for about a week. We heard a shrill, peculiar whistling each evening. We would hear it coming from one ridge, and then hear an answering whistling from the other ridge. We also heard a sound which I could best describe as a booming, thumping sound, just like something was hitting itself on its chest. Hank asked me to accompany him to the spring, about 100 yards away from our cabin, to get some water, and suggested we take our rifles, to be on the safe side. We walked to the spring, and then Hank yelled and raised his rifle, and at that instant, I saw it. It was a hairy creature, and it was about 100 yards away, on the other side of the little canyon, standing by a pine tree. It dodged behind the tree, and it poked its head out from the side of the tree. And at the same time, Hank shot. I could see the bark fly out from the tree from each of his 3 shots. Some may say that that was quite a distance to see the bark fly, but I saw it. The creature I judged to have been about 7 feet tall with blackish brown hair. It disappeared from our view for a short time, but then we saw it, running fast and upright, about 200 yards down the little canyon. I shot 3 times before it disappeared from view. We took the water back to the cabin and explained the affair to the rest of the party, and we all agreed, including Hank, to go home the next morning as it would be dark before we could get to the car. We agreed it would be unsound to be caught by the darkness on the way out. Nightfall found us in our pine log cabin. We had built the cabin ourselves and had made it very sturdy. It stood for many years afterward and was visited by many sightseers until a few years ago when it was burnt to the ground. The circumstances of the fire I don't recall. In the cabin, we had a long bunk bed which could sleep 2, feet to feet, the rest of us sleeping in pine boughs on the floor. At one end of the cabin, we had a fireplace fashioned out of rocks. There were no windows in the cabin, so darkness found all of us in the cabin, more calm now, and my tooth was better. Somehow the excitement seemed to work a temporary cure on it. We were sitting around, puffing on pipes, and talking about the trip home the next day. Each of us settled down in his crude but welcomed bed and soon fell asleep. About midnight, we were all awakened. Hank, who was sleeping on the floor, was yelling and kicking, but the noise that had awakened us was a tremendous thud against the cabin wall. Some of the chinking had been knocked loose from between the logs and had fell across Hank's chest. He had his rifle in his hand and he was waving it back and forth as he kicked and yelled. Hank always slept with his gun nearby. It was a Remington automatic, my gun being a .30-30 Winchester, which I still have. I helped to get the chinking off of him, and he jumped to his feet. Then we heard a great commotion outside. It sounded like a great number of feet trampling and rattling over a pile of our unused shakes. We grabbed our guns. Hank squinted through the space left by the chinking. By actual count, we only saw 3 of the creatures together at one time, but it sounded like there were many more. This was the start of the famous attack, of which so much has been written in Washington and Oregon newspapers throughout the years. Most accounts tell of giant boulders being hurled against the cabin, and say some even fell through the roof, but this is not quite the case. There were very few large rocks in that area. It's true that many small ones were hurled at the cabin, but they did not break through the roof, but hit with a bang and rolled off. Some did fall through the chimney of the fireplace. Some accounts state that I was hit in the head with a rock and knocked unconscious. This is not true. The only time we shot our guns that night was when the creatures were attacking the cabin. When they would quiet down for a few minutes, we would quit shooting. I told the rest of the party that maybe, if they saw we were only shooting when they attacked, they might realize that we were only defending ourselves. We could have had clear shots at them through the opening left by the chinking, had we chose to shoot. We did shoot, however, when they climbed onto our roof. We shot round after round through the roof. We had to brace the hew log door with a long pull taken from the bunk bed. The creatures were pushing against it, and the whole door vibrated from the impact. We responded by firing more and more rounds through the door. They pushed against the walls of the cabin as if trying to push the cabin over, but this was pretty much an impossibility. As previously stated, the cabin was a sturdy made building. Hank and I did most of the shooting. The rest of the party crowded to the far end of the cabin, guns in their hands. One had a pistol, which still is in my family's possession. The others clutched their rifles. They seemed stunned and incredulous. The attack continued the remainder of the night, with only short intervals between. A most profound and frightening experience occurred when one of the creatures, being close to the cabin, reached an arm through the chinking space and seized one of our axes by the handle. A much written about incident, and a true one. Before the thing could pull the axe out, I swiftly turned the head of the axe upright so that it caught on the logs, and at the time, Hank shot, barely missing my hand. The creature let go, and I pulled the handle back in and put the axe in a safe place. A humorous thing I well remember was Hank singing, "If you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone, and we'll all go home in the morning." He did not mean to be humorous, for Hank was dead serious, and he sang under the impression that the mountain devils, as he called them, might understand and go away. The attack ended just before daylight. Just as soon as we were sure it was light enough to see, we came cautiously out of the cabin. It was not long before I saw one of the ape-like creatures standing about 80 yards away near the edge of Ape Canyon. I shot 3 times, and it toppled over the cliff and down into the gorge, some 400 feet below. Then Hank said we should get out of there as soon as possible and not bother to pack our supplies or equipment out. After all, he said, it's better to lose them than our lives. We were all only too glad to agree. We brought out only that which we could get into our pack sacks. We left about $200 in supplies, powder, and drilling equipment behind. I tried to persuade everyone not to relate the happenings to anyone, and they agreed. But Hank soon let the cat out of the bag. We made our way to Spirit Lake, and Hank went into the ranger station. He had told the ranger earlier about the tracks, and the ranger had replied, "Let me know if you find out what they are." That's just what Hank did, to the puzzlement of the ranger. When we were back home in Kelso, Washington, he told some of his friends, and somehow the story leaked to the papers, and the great hairy ape hunt of 1924 was on. Now, Fred Beck provided one of the most detailed accounts of the event that unfolded that day and night. His recounting helps paint a vivid picture of the fear and confusion experienced by the miners. Historically and geographically, this was not an isolated encounter, and it helped shape the ongoing debate about the existence of Sasquatch. The story was widely printed in newspapers and set off an ape hunt in the surrounding area at the time, and was retold and rewritten about and reenacted for decades afterwards. After abandoning their claim and the cabin itself, all reports agree that the 5 never returned to reclaim their site. U.S. Forest Rangers J.H. Huffman and William Welch were tasked with investigating the claims of this event. Huffman and Welch descended into the supposedly inaccessible canyon, but found nothing. They supposedly demonstrated how a 14-inch long footprint found near the cabin could have easily have been faked, and concluded that the miners probably placed large stones near the cabin themselves to enhance their tale. Since then, the area has become a focal point for researchers and enthusiasts investigating Sasquatch sightings. Various expeditions have sought out hard evidence, but to date, solid proof remains as elusive as the creatures themselves. Skeptics argue that the miners' accounts may have stemmed from an exhaustion or a possible hallucinatory experience due to their isolation in such a remote location. Historically, the Ape Canyon incident is often credited with drawing attention to the existence of Bigfoot in American culture. The event has been commemorated in various documentaries, books, and anecdotal recountings by enthusiasts. The story is widely referenced at Bigfoot conventions and conferences and has spurred an interest into the mystery surrounding Sasquatch. It's even credited for the naming of a nearby ape cave, a cave discovered and first explored by a Boy Scout troop whose troop name was known as the St. Helen Apes. Now synonymous with the Sasquatch lore, inspiring numerous stories and folklore. Many stories exaggerate details, creating a narrative that blends fact with fiction. Over the years, the incident has been cited by Bigfoot enthusiasts as solid evidence of Sasquatch's existence, though it also serves as an example of how folklore can evolve. The Ape Canyon incident remains a riveting tale of mystery, folklore, and blurred lines between reality and myth, as a mix of confirmed facts and speculative details. The miner's encounter continues to intrigue and entertain as people explore both the fear they faced and the mystique surrounding the mysterious creatures. Now, the book that I referenced, it's not a very big book. And if you entertain the ideas of the woo aspects of Bigfoot, Sasquatch, if those things are of interest to you, I suggest that you get yourself a copy of this and read the additional things that are in there that Fred Beck references. Many of them fall within the woo. And it makes me wonder, is this where that started? Or are these a factual account and line up perfectly with what so many other people claim to experience with these creatures? Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, the story continues to capture the imagination. I hope you've enjoyed this look back at one of Bigfootery's most storied accounts. Let me know what other events you'd like to hear me dive into in an episode such as this. You can email me at contact.uncomfortable@gmail.com, or you can message me your suggestion on Instagram at uncomfortablepodcast65. Thank you for taking this look back at Bigfoot history with me. And until next time, stay uncomfortable.